Everybody attending this session.
Yeah.
Yes, this session. Okay, thank you. This session, our seminar, IEEE Sohar University Students Branch Seminar. This is the third seminar in this academic year. We already have one seminar on October, and this November we have two. This is the third seminar. Okay, Dr. Ali will give a presentation about research, and let me just introduce brief about Dr. Ali. Dr. Ali Al-Wadi is an assistant professor in the engineering department of the University of Iraq, Sulaimani. He has obtained his bachelor degree in electrical and computer engineering from Sohar University, Oman in 2016. He's one of our graduates. And in 2019, Ali obtained a PhD in renewable energy from CIRI UKM, National University of Malaysia. And he has over 50 publications in Web of Science and Scopus Index Journal, international journals. And he is the author of the book Photovoltaic Thermal PVT System Principle Design and Application, which was published by Springer Nation in 2020. Dr. Ali, the mic with you.
All right. Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Hassan. And can you see my over here? Can you see the is it clear? Is the slides clear for you here?
Yeah. For me, it's okay.
Yeah,
So you can see. All right, thank you. Thank you for the feedback. Yeah. So research remarks and outline introduction. Generally speaking, this seminar is designed to provide an outline introduction into the necessity of research, the types of research, the impacts of research, and how we can carry out research, and perhaps some techniques that someone can follow in order to improve their research output. And so, generally speaking, the contents are going to cover the concepts and principles, certain types, critical components of a research article, the publishing process, peer review elements, and post-publication, which is also very important. So we'll start with a general premise of why we need research. You can clearly see here, this is a glass of water, and we know for a fact that the glass of water is not going to increase the amount of water within it unless we put more water inside of this glass. And this sort of serves like an analogy for research and for science in general. Science is limited to what we know and what we have researched and achieved in the past. The only way for science to grow is if we provide even more research and studies onto various topics. So when I look at this glass, I think, well, what are the limitations of science? Where have we stopped, and how can we improve upon it? And obviously, we are dealing with science, and we're dealing with applied science. And so for science, we're talking about physics and chemistry and biology. And for applied science, we're speaking of medicine, we're speaking of engineering and IT and information technology and whatnot. So there's all sorts of fields and disciplines that are related to the scientific fields that require research in order for them to grow. So this growth of the scientific establishment is of dire need for further research. Now, most of research is done incrementally. So a lot of research, in many cases, is done through an incremental process, meaning that perhaps I would try to...
Yeah.
Not quite sure. How am I going to... yeah. All right, so I think this would help. All right. So forgive me, I've muted the remaining participants. All right. All right then. So as you can see here, in essence, what we're trying to do is we're trying to improve upon what has already been established, but in an incremental fashion. Now, a lot of research is done incrementally up until we have some kind of a groundbreaking piece of research. This could be also relate to another concept, which is the Nobel Prize concept, where we can have Nobel Prizes being given to researchers who come up with groundbreaking research. But generally speaking, in order for them to perhaps do this major shift or major achievement, they would have to stand on the shoulders of the many incremental research studies that have been done prior to that. So in essence, most of the current establishment requires research. Research is also very important when it comes to society building, community building, and improving, and also when it comes to the industry. So trying to improve certain technology in the industry, well, they utilize a lot of research. So that's another thing that we have to consider. And with research, in essence, what we are discussing is trying to see further ahead and then report back. So that's essentially what you're doing as a researcher. So as a student, as a mentor, as an advisor, as a professor, you should always look at your research as one step forward, and the publication of research is one step backward, which means basically you go a step forward by doing the experiments, but then you need to report on these experiments. And so essentially, research is a sharing of original work. It's a sharing of discoveries. And the reason why we need to share those is because they would require verification. And so making a claim is not sufficient, obviously. There's a saying that goes, good science is science that can be proven wrong. In essence, it's a science that has the sufficient, let's say, methodology described and the sufficient information provided. Therefore, someone can actually repeat the study and actually find out what is wrong with it, or perhaps if it's correct or incorrect, and so on. So that's the importance of it. So you're really going one step forward to do the experiment, to let's say do the interview, to collect the data somehow, and then you have to go one step backward by writing the research article itself. And so you look backward at everything you have done, at everything you have read, at everything you have viewed, and then you take that and then you try to sort of send it across. So that's the concept of research. So when you hear research, sometimes research is not actually writing a research paper or doing a poster presentation. Sometimes research is you sitting, at a remote location or inside of a laboratory or inside of the library, and you're reading a research article. That's what research is. And so you could sort of look at the research cycle in terms of stages. You can sort of think of it as stages. And it starts with the stage of identifying the research area. Now, no matter what the research area is, it could be social science, it could be something related to earth science, it could be something related to engineering, renewable energy, information technology, and whatnot. You need to look at the broad area of your interest. Not only look at the broad area of your interest, but you have to investigate that area to look for the main points of what you call them as research gaps. Those are the main points that have not been explored within this area. So understanding the research gaps within the area is extremely important. The reason is because that in and of itself is justification for carrying out the research. That's point number one. And point number two, that would bring a lot of contribution to the scientific establishment within that area. So perhaps if you are interested in law or international studies, let's say, perhaps international law. So if you're interested in international law, then you need to start thinking, what is my area within international law? Is there a specific criteria or a specific law that I would like to focus on? And so this is where we see the element of narrowing our area of interest. So think to yourself, ask yourself, if you're an engineer, you can't just say, I'm going to do research in engineering. Well, engineering is a very big area. Well, you have electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemical engineering. But even within the electrical engineering discipline, for instance, well, we have power and we have all sorts of communication engineering and whatnot. So maybe you're interested in power. Well, which specific components are you interested in power? This is one thing that is very important about science that many people should understand, that it rewards consistency within the topic that you choose. For instance, if you do research in the same topic over and over, you're probably going to have a lot of research output, and you're probably going to come up with a groundbreaking discoveries. The main reason for this is because you already established the infrastructure. I'll give you an example. Let's say I am interested in solar technology, which I am. I'm interested in solar technology. So I already have the infrastructure to understand solar technology and do new research on solar technology. So for instance, I've read a lot of research on solar technology. I have bought a lot of equipment that can help me with solar technology related experiments. Now, if I suddenly decided to shift from solar to wind, or I decided to shift from solar technology to let's say, for like solar energy resource to a diesel energy resource, well, now I need to adopt new techniques, new ideas. I need to discover or rediscover the main principles behind it. So now I have just lost my infrastructure, basically. Now it would add something. So now you have a multidimensional aspect to your research career, but it's always important to really find one point where you are consistently publishing within, because if you do that, it's usually rewarded from a scientific standpoint. So then you identify your research area and you try to find the gaps. From there, you need to move on to the design of your research study. And perhaps this is the most important element in the entire cycle, because without this design, you will be lost. In essence, designing the type of study that you would like to conduct and the type of subjects that you would like to examine and the parameters that you would like to use for your examinations and the analysis techniques that you would like to use for these parameters is extremely important. Without having them, first of all, you're going to have to justify every single step that you do. And also, you might, whatever you do might not be in line with the aims and objectives of your research. So you need to consider that as well. So when we talk about designing of a research study, your design has to, well, meet the, perhaps the objectives of your research. And it is, in essence, a layout of the objectives of your research and whatnot. Now, once you create your design, and let's say you choose that you're going to have some kind of a experimental study, and this experiment is going to be done inside of the lab, not outside, and it's going to be done for a certain test subject and for a certain period of time, then you begin your research process. So you carry out the research, you make sure you optimize the parameters that you're going to use, so you have to read more research articles. And this is another tip that is extremely important, which is the number one justification is the literature. So always return back to the literature. At some point, you need to get far away from the literature, but the literature has to always be at the back, meaning that do not diverge too much from the literature or from the scientific establishment. That doesn't mean you shouldn't challenge the status quo. It just means that you should make sure that you are in line with the overall understanding of the topic. Once you have something that is groundbreaking, then you can sort of display that. So then, yeah, you carry out your research, and then you move into the analysis of your research or the results. So this is an important part as well, which is what we call as result interpretation. Now, previously, because of the limitations that human beings had, problem formulation would be very simple, because most of the time would be spent on coming up with the results. For example, it's not as easy as it is today to have a couple of sensors and a data acquisition system, or conduct a survey across the globe. Now I can do a survey in China, I can do a survey in Australia, I can do a survey anywhere I want. Perhaps I can test devices virtually, so from far away. Perhaps I can hire different institutes. This wasn't always the case. The same thing applies for actually solving mathematical problems. So if you have, let's say, a mathematical problem like a heat diffusion equation and heat transfer, and you're trying to solve this mathematical problem, well, for a very simple geometry, such as a plane wall, it will take a lot of time for you to come up with the solution to such problem. And that sort of tells us that in the past, the means to come up with the results were so hard that researchers and intellectuals had to simplify the problem, and also didn't have enough time for the interpretation of the result. So it sort of looked like this, like a pyramid. But now it's almost like an inverted pyramid because of the existence of computers. Because now with computers and with the advancement in technologies, the results has become an easy thing to arrive at. I'm sure it's not so easy, and in some cases, some research, might be a little bit hard, and perhaps even catastrophically hard, you could say. But nonetheless, we still have the equipment, and this equipment can sort of record the data. And once you have an infrastructure, you can just repeatedly use that infrastructure with different test specimens or different test subjects. And so once you establish that, and once you have that, and once you collect all the data, now it's easy for you to integrate the data. It's easy for you to do all sorts of operations on the data and get the results. So now getting the results has become the easy part. And because it's easy to get the results, now we can be more creative with problem formulation and also with the interpretation of the results. This is why the analysis of your research results is extremely important. Now, once that is done and once the process of research has been completed, then comes the important task of converting it into a manuscript that is to be published at an international peer-reviewed journal, for instance, or at a conference, for instance. And that in and of itself, when it's being shared, would sort of create more interest and would generate more ideas to sort of go back at the first step and try to identify a research area that requires improvement, and it's sort of like an upward spiral, so to speak. So that's the research cycle. Now, if you think of the type of research that you can partake in, there's all sorts of research classifications. This is just one classification that I found, where there is fundamental research, where it examines fundamental theoretical concepts. It could be exploratory, where it's interested in sort of things that are outside of the bound of what we understand. There's conclusive research, where perhaps the final remarks are going to sort of fully explain a certain concept or a certain topic. There are surveys where you can conduct surveys and you could sort of establish data based on those. And there could be case studies. Something that is very important is case studies. So, for example, there could be studies that cover perhaps the performance of a certain energy device in general, globally, worldwide. However, that could totally shift or change when it comes to, let's say, somewhere like Sahara. So, because Sahara has a different geographical distribution, it has different biomes. It has a different climate situation. And so all of the parameters associated with the climate are also going to change. Therefore, the device could act differently. So that's one form of case study. Another form of case studies is to examine certain systems, so a specific system. So for instance, you might examine uninterruptible power supplies for remote health clinics, for example, or for hospitals, where you don't want a power outage to impact the hospital. So, but you are interested in a specific type of hospital and a specific type of UPS, uninterruptible power supply. So that's an example of case studies. There are other case studies, such as the psychological impact of war, for instance. So some research could be as general as to say the psychological impacts of war, but doesn't really think about the variation of culture. So perhaps the variation of culture and the type of war might strongly affect the psychological impacts it has over the population. Therefore, doing a case study on the psychological impacts of war, for example, in Europe versus that perhaps in the Middle East, you could get wildly different results, and there's definitely going to be some kind of an intersection. So that's something else that you have to take into consideration. Quantitative, qualitative, descriptive, analytical, and applied research. As engineers, I think that the applied research component is the one that has gotten most of the funding, most of the grants. A lot of applied science are interested in applied research, because with fundamental research, you are interested in sort of the base, while with applied research, you're interested into something that is more of like the interface, or what the user deals with, or what the investor deals with, and whatnot. So it's sort of closer to the real world, so to speak. And so again, type of research methodologies, you can see here, these are just different graphs to sort of compare between them and to sort of illustrate the concepts here. So for example, correlation. You probably have seen this before, or you've heard of it. For example, they would create a correlation between meat consumption and let's say heart disease, for instance, or perhaps sugar and heart disease or diabetes or whatnot. That's correlation research. So meaning that they are trying to find the correlation between two different parameters. Sometimes it's a causation, so causal. So for instance, this particular parameter leads to an impact on another parameter on another parameter all the time. So it could be strictly experimental, and it could look into the historical aspects, or it could be through surveys that are conducted between people. So for instance, you are trying to see the utility or the impact of mainstream news on the overall, perhaps on the overall acceptance of change in technological, in the technological sector. So that could be an idea that you're interested in. So then in all sorts of fields, in all sorts of research fields, you can see that there's all sorts of types of research methodologies that can be followed in order to achieve whatever you are trying to arrive at or discover, perhaps. And so now we know why we need research. We know the stages of research, and one of those stages is the research paper. Now we need to understand critical components of research. So for example, here are some 8 components to a research process. One of them is the purpose. You need to have a purpose behind what you are doing. Generally speaking, I would say that the purpose is a synonym for me for problem statement. Problem statement derives the purpose of your research. So you need to be very perhaps diligent when it comes to formulating your problem statement. Now I will come to that in a bit, but the whole idea of having a purpose is that, well, if you don't have an actual direction to go to, then it wouldn't matter what the results are, and perhaps that would not be desirable. You need an actual direction that you are heading towards. Whether your hypothesis is going to be correct or not correct, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you have conducted the experiments and you have come up with the results and you have interpreted them. And what is a fact is a fact. If this can be re-examined, it could be redone. No matter how it's carried out, at the end of the day, you have gone through the process. However, the purpose here is that you want to create something that is significant. You want to create something that is meaningful and useful to your fellow researchers. After all, the quality of your research is usually evaluated by how impactful it is to society, to the industry, generally to humanity as well. So you start with a purpose, and then you move on to your research questions. And those are the questions that you are interested in asking and finding an answer to. Now, it's not about the quality of our answers. It's actually about the quality of our questions. You need to ask the right questions. Finding the answers becomes easy to do as you go on through the process. But asking the right questions is extremely important. So you ask the questions that are going to, that answering them would lead to an actual conclusion, to something that you can sort of summarize within one sentence, for instance. So those are the type of questions you ask. So perhaps for most people, they don't spend much time on asking questions because, well, the research questions section in their thesis or in their research article is usually 3 lines. Now, I understand that you can sort of come up with 3 lines, but what were these lines based on? A good tip here is that you can have multiple questions and you sort of begin to eliminate the questions until you arrive at specific number of questions that will cover exactly what you are looking for, or that will allow you to find the solution to exactly what you are looking for. And then you have to create your assumptions. Now, assumptions is usually based on research. For example, if I'm going to work on perhaps something related to law, I could be making, or perhaps economy. So for instance, economy. So if I'm interested in some research related to economy or business, and I'm interested in the return on investment, and I'm creating this model that will sort of improve the return on investment for a certain type of project, then I need to have some assumptions. For example, the interest rate or the inflation rate, interest, discount, inflation, perhaps all sorts of assumptions related to the future sum of money, for instance. So all of these are different assumptions that you're going to have to make, because, well, we're talking about general topics, and some parameters are parameters that are going to change with time or with place, and so they're not always the same. I know this from my field as well, because when I did research in my field, I found that with renewable energy, we're going to have to make a lot of assumptions about perhaps the price of the, for example, of the device, the price of operation and maintenance, installation, replacement costs, and even the lifetime of the device itself, which is, again, it's an assumption as well. So these assumptions are very important. So you need to know a list, or you need to have a list of the assumptions that you're going to make. And you can't just make an assumption like that. Your assumptions has to be feasible. So it is not feasible to assume that water has a thermal conductivity of 2000 watts per meter Kelvin. So we need to have some kind of a reasonable assumptions. You have to choose the methods of which you are going to collect samples and collect the data as well. So how are you going to sample whatever population you have, and how are you going to collect this data? Is it going to be virtual? Is it going to be hard copies? Even when you collect them, are you going to collect them all at once or within a specific period of time? The more design and the more attention you pay towards these things and create an infrastructure where you have a methodology that is solid, that is based on real good justifications, the more that now you can develop a machine that you can use over and over again, but for different ideas of research. And you need that because you need to save as much time as possible because of the time constraints that you have on your research, and because of the many researchers and many students. So if you are a student, you have a limited time to do your research. So from now, begin by choosing your sampling, how you're going to sample, and also how you're going to collect your data, and mention everything you're going to do, lay it out, document it in your thesis. The more you do that, the better your thesis is going to be. Different researchers utilize different methods. So perhaps in some cases, researchers are more interested in, let's say, measuring the feedback of a control system, or perhaps measuring or doing measurements, for instance, at a certain surface, and not considering different types of surfaces for and so on. So there's all sorts of examples where you can see that researchers follow a particular method. For example, in nanofluids, I've dealt with nanofluids before. When we're trying to produce nanoparticles, there's the or nanofluids, there's the one-step method, and then there's the two-step method. And most researchers utilize the two-step method because it's for one is cheap, so and it can be done within laboratory, and we can have some kind of control over it. So that's researcher methods. The quality criteria, well, you need to evaluate your data, and you need to evaluate the quality of your project. And to evaluate it, you're probably going to use certain metrics. So for instance, you might be calculating the error, the root mean square error, the mean absolute percentage error, and so on. So calculating the errors and having some kind of a tolerance. So if you are doing some kind of a perhaps computational fluid dynamics or finite element technique type research, and perhaps you're going to have some kind of a tolerance criteria for the error. And once the error is beneath that value, then you can sort of stop the iterations that you are doing in order to arrive at the values that satisfy perhaps your equations. And finally, the report writing. So that's the final part, which is the report. Now, your report could be something like a thesis, it could be a book, it could be a book chapter, it could be a research article, it could be something that is part of a newsletter. It could even be something as simple as doing a poster presentation and whatnot. So those are all different aspects to consider. So I want you to think about the purpose, the first part that I mentioned. And I said that it's basically, for me, I really consider it to be a synonym for the problem statement, because problem statement is the root of everything. During my PhD study, my supervisor, Professor Qamar Zaman Sufyan, he used to tell me a very important advice. He used to always say that students who do not have a problem statement will never complete their study. You need to have a problem statement. If you have a problem statement, you can complete your study. It's sort of the fundamental component of all of research. So you need to have a problem that is worthy of being investigated. And a statement could be something, it could be like even half a page. It could be 200 words, 500 words. Really depends on how articulate you'd like to be. But you really have to articulate it well. And here are just some examples for problem statements. Perhaps the topic you are interested in, again, you could be majoring in anything. You could be majoring in IT, software engineering, cybersecurity, engineering itself, medical lab sciences. You could be interested in, pharmacy. You could be all sorts of things. So the lack of studies. So the topic you're interested in is the lack of studies. There are not enough studies on this particular topic. So people have not investigated this topic enough. Perhaps it's the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on rural communities. Maybe everyone is studying the economic impacts on perhaps in the city, perhaps in the suburbs, but no one is studying it for rural communities. Well, maybe that's important, and maybe that's something that we should pay attention to, and governments can sort of react to and adapt to, so that we can solve a certain problem or an important problem like that. So we need to study it, because it could have consequences, which is another topic or another concept that is very important, that has to be hand to hand with your problem statement, which is the consequences of these problems. You need to mention the consequences. So another thing is it's not being done locally. This is a very important one, actually. Maybe this is done. The research is done in the UK. Maybe it's done in Saudi Arabia. Maybe it's done in Qatar. Maybe it's not done in Sohar, Oman. That is a problem statement, and it is a very valid problem statement. Local research is extremely important, and it usually produces more accuracy, in fact. And it certainly is very useful to the local community, which you want you want the local community to benefit from this. After all, as I mentioned at the beginning, research is for the benefit of the local community and the global community as well. And even a local study can be useful for the global community as well. Now, another problem statement is that the factors are not considered. So maybe you have a certain equation and it has all sorts of factors, but then the equation doesn't really cover all of the factors. So perhaps I am viewing the output of a certain device, or like an energy device, and I am studying all of the factors with the exception of, let's say, a parameter that is related to the wear and tear that happens on the material of the device or the machine. So that's something also that is that should be considered. So the more factors you add, if you add even one factor or one parameter that has not been studied before, and show the significance of this parameter on the overall process, you can actually consider that a problem statement, and actually a very important problem statement, because it can sort of shift the or it can sort of answer many unanswered questions. Limited samples are considered. So perhaps there have been done, maybe some research have been done, but it's only considered for limited samples. So perhaps it has been done for a certain population, but it's only considered for certain demographic within that population, and did not consider other demographics. I can see things related to medicine, where you can sort of focus on one demographic, but now you can sort of examine other demographics. This could be related to psychology as well. So in general, as you formulate your problem statement, try to begin with a general problem statement, but don't stop there. You need to get more field specific and then more technique specific. I think that this is a really good template for a problem statement. So what's the general problem? The general problem could be something like, the lack of investment in solar energy. I could say that that's a general problem. A field specific one, maybe it's something specific to the technology of photovoltaic thermal technology. So there's a lack of investment in photovoltaic thermal technology due to its low energy conversion efficiency and so on. And then later on, it can have technique specific, meaning that the previous two problems have been solved by researchers, but I am saying that even the ones that have been solved well, there's a problem there too that we're trying to sort of surpass. So perhaps the existing techniques have reached to a saturation level of improvement, and we want to sort of find a way in order to surpass those. So those are the general markers for creating a problem statement, which, as I mentioned, is a critical component of research. So in your research, as you do your research paper, you need to have a cover page. This cover page is going to be submitted to the editor of the journal. You need to have an outline of the basic points of the research or the research highlights. You need to have the general components of the research article, such as the abstract, the introduction, the methodology, the results, the discussion, and the conclusion. And within them, within each component, you're going to provide descriptions. So for example, in the abstract, you're going to have a general problem statement. You're going to introduce the topic. You're going to talk about some of the results, and you're going to end it up with some concluding remarks. So in essence, it's a very short summary, similar to the executive summary in a proposal. That will be the abstract of a research article. And when you write it, you think everyone is privy to that, whether it's an open access published article or in subscription-based journals. Everyone gets to see your abstract. So when you write the abstract, you have to make sure that you write it in such a way that it's really representative of everything that exists in your research article. The same applies to your title. The title has to reflect well the content of the research paper. Once you do that, you can move on to everything else. It's important to note, though, that you can do the abstract and the title at the end of your research. Many people start with the abstract and have all sorts of dreams, and then when they do the research article, they deviate from what is mentioned in the abstract, which is actually a common it's a commonly known fact about research, is that in many cases the abstract is way more polished than the actual research itself. So over-promising can be a problem. The research methodology and the introduction. Well, the introduction is going to be composed of a research background, of your problem statement, is going to have is going to have the research gap, so what is missing from the research, and what you are intending to do, and perhaps even an outline of your research. But with the methodology, you're going to have to go deeper into explaining your entire experimental process. How did you formulate the experiment? Why? So the justification for it. And how do you plan to validate the results? If you're doing an actual experiment and you are using certain devices, are you performing calibration? So are you calibrating your devices? Are you conducting uncertainty analysis for your experiments? Those are a couple of the things that are extremely important when discussing or when preparing the research methodology, because without them, your research cannot be replicated. So that's something to keep in mind. The final part is the conclusion, and the conclusion has to be it is as important as the abstract in some cases, because with the conclusion, the reader is at this point is interested to know if this research can conclusively give them any sorts of information. So are we playing around with words, or are we actually coming up with an actual concrete outcome of the research? So that's why the conclusion is important. I don't think I need to mention the references, but because the references are a clear component of research. You need to always have references because you need to sort of refer to other people's work for either validation or for justification of some of the decisions you make. Now, I said remarks for research, and one of those remarks is the art. The art is extremely important. So this is a study that I pulled from a Nature journal, and you can see here the artistic element is very important. Now, some people can draw something this artistically to illustrate a physical concept related to, for example, photons, and also, but in a much less artistic manner. The more artistic you are, and the more clear you are, the more interested the reader will be in your work. And it does have an impact on the reader's perceptions. Now, some readers are only interested in the content of what you are doing, and they're not interested at all in the artistic element. But I would say that a higher percentage of the readers will be interested in the artistic element, which means data visualization should be a focus of what you do. So you need to, by the time you end with everything, you finish everything, you've done the hard work, it's time to showcase how hard the work has been, and also to showcase all of the parameters in a simplified manner. So it's easy for a non-professional to understand at the very least. So I could be someone from a different field, but I can look at a figure like this and I can understand it. Obviously with the captions. Without the captions, I cannot. So obviously I would need the captions. Part of the art is the do's and don'ts. You can see here, those are the two same graphs, by the way. Those are the two same graphs, but one of them would have colors to showcase each component, and the other one won't have colors to show any component, only one color to show one component. Now, both of them are actually good, depending on what you're trying to show. So for instance, you can choose the one with only one color, which is the red colored line, while the remaining data are having the same color, for instance, gray. And this is done to highlight the most important parameter that you are discussing, let's say, or that you intend to display from your figure. Or you could say something like, no, you can actually create a distinction between all of them so that the reader can see the difference between the different graphs and can make judgments themselves as well. And they can also understand the analysis. So both are correct. It just depends on what you are trying to show. And so here, something as simple as color, which is not so simple, but something as simple as color could be so impactful to your research. Certain don'ts, you don't want to overcomplicate everything, even if you are comprehensive. So when you see something like this with enough data like this, you might say, then maybe a figure was not the best mean to represent this data, because with a figure like this is quite complicated. And trust me, I have done it before. So I have done complicated figure like these before. I'm not too proud of them. And so you always have to, find yourself an easy figure to read and understand by the reader, regardless of how complex the topic is. So obviously you cannot make it too simple, but the simpler you can make it, especially with the use of art, the better it is. So data visualization should be something you should also work on your infrastructure. I don't anticipate you to sort of have a prolonged thinking process every time, but once you understand the concept of each chart and figure and plot, and once you understand their concepts, when do you use a pie chart, when do you use a bar graph? So once you understand these concepts, then you can sort of utilize them in your work as well. Publishing process. So as we go on to the publishing process, this is just a recently published article that I had. And as you can see here in the publishing process, you need to have a complete manuscript, but you also need to send a cover letter. And in the cover letter, you need to explain what you have done. What you have done, what are the components of your research. You need sometimes to mention whether it's in line with the journal's aims. This is a marker. Every journal has certain aims and scopes. You need to be careful of those. So if it's a renewable energy journal, you cannot be sending things related to medicine, and vice versa. If you are interested in IT technology, well, you cannot send it to a journal that has zero interest in IT technology. So what do? You just type in the name of the journal. This could be something famous in your field, and you go to the main page, the home page, and in the home page, you can sort of view, you can view their scope and their perhaps their interest as a journal. Another thing is Journal Finder. This is one of the tools that exists online that allows you to find different research articles. So you write the paper title, you write the abstract, you write the keywords that you are interested in, you choose the field, and it will search for journals for you. So this is one of the ways in order to find a suitable journal for publication. Now, you might be on a very limited time scale. So knowing how long it takes for the journal to gives you a decision and reply to you is very important. So perhaps you don't have 13 weeks to spend. So if you don't have 13 weeks to spend to get to first decision, then maybe you shouldn't submit it in a journal that would require 13 weeks. Maybe you should submit it to a journal that would have a very faster process of peer review, perhaps, or a very faster publication process. So this is something you should consider as well. Now, nothing is going to beat an actual knowledge of the field itself. So we need to have an actual knowledge of the field itself. Here you can see various journals being shown to me by the journal finder. As you go into a journal, you always want to, well, obviously you're going there to submit your article. So it's always going to be very simple for you to read the main page of the journal and sort of understand and navigate around the site. It's usually very much self-explanatory, but the most important ones are to submit your paper and to understand the guide for authors, because the guide for authors could be a major help for you to understand how the journal operates and for you to sort of be in phase with the journal's requirements for publication. So the guideline for authors is very important. You might submit a 5,000 word original research paper to a journal that only accepts 2,000 words paper because they're interested in, let's say, micro papers, for instance, or perhaps case studies. So they're not interested in a case study of 5,000 words. They want a case study of 2,000 words. Now, there are some leeways with those. It really depends on the journal and how they conduct their work. And generally, a lot of these requirements are template-related requirements. So what's the font? What's the size? What's the organization? What's the order? Now, this is important. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's not necessarily correlated, connected to the content. However, some journals would provide criteria for the content. So I've seen many journals in my field where the editors would say, this type of studies, we will not accept it because of 1, 2, 3, and so on. So that's something to consider as well. So again, you have a new submission, you want to do your initial checks. So you submit the journal, you submit the paper to the journal, and immediately goes to the desk editor. So it's moved from the editorial team, it goes to the editor, the desk at the desk. So now the editor is dealing with your research article, and they could have all the way from 1 week up to even more, really depends on how busy the journal is. And the editor is going to view the research from a general point of view, but not specifically, and see whether it's worthy to be sent to peer review. If it is worthy to be sent to peer review, then the editor is going to send it to your peers, that is fellow scientists in your field. Those are people who are interested in publishing in the field as well. Perhaps even outside of your field, by the way. So there's always peer review for multidisciplinary aspects. So what is peer review? So I imagine if I was a peer reviewer and I receive a research article from a certain researcher, well, then now I can look at their research and I can objectively evaluate their research and see whether there are points that can be improved and there are points that can be neglected. The practice of peer review is, well, it's very important in the scientific establishment. However, it does go through ups and downs depending on how it's being implemented and depending on the field. In some fields, you need the peer review to be double blind, meaning that the peer reviewer doesn't know the author and the author doesn't know the peer reviewer. In other cases, it could be single blind, where the peer reviewer knows the author while the author doesn't know the peer reviewer. Once you have the revision sent back to you, so you send, okay, I finished my paper, I send it to the journal, the editor sends it to the peer reviewers, I wait for 1 month, 1 month and a half, I receive back an email from the editor telling me you have these comments. All right, so you might be giving comments. Now, it could be a flat out reject where they reject your research entirely. So then now you're going to have to find a new journal to submit to, but it would be very important for you to ask for feedback, because the feedback could be critical. Maybe the paper is unpublishable or refutable. Or you could get major and minor comments, and each one of them you'll be given a specific period of time to do your revisions. So once you get a revised decision, and you receive your revised submission, then you can have work on your paper and then submit it again. And once you submit it again, there's going to be another peer review process. Let's say you could go all the way up to 5 peer review rounds, or it could be 1 round of peer review. It really depends on the peer reviewers and what do they think about your research. Even the editor in some cases might interfere in the process as well. Once you get your preliminary acceptance, then you can move on to the proofing and dealing with the dealing with the final outcome of your research, and how is it going to look like, and also how you can sign the copyrights and whatnot. So this is the entire process. So a couple of the things that you can think of is to check for the journal's rank or indexing. So if you are, now some of you or most of you may be a bachelor's degree students, so it's not part of your requirement. But for those who are master, PhD, or even professors, perhaps part of your requirement is to publish a paper in a Q1 indexed journal. So, and it has to be a Web of Science journal. So you need to make sure that you check for the indexing of your journal by using the suitable platforms to check for those, check for the journal scope, check for the publication time, check the instructions for the authors, start the submission, upload the documents, check your submission before you verify it for the last time, and then you verify your submission. In terms of the peer review process, I know that right now I'm probably going to go over my time. I want to give 5 minutes, at the very least 5 minutes, for questions and answers. So in terms of the peer review process, there's really, this is just another figure that sort of describes what we've explained, where after the submission, there is an editor assessment, there is a reviewer's assessment, and without the reviewers allowing for the manuscript to move forward, it cannot be accepted and sent to the production. These are the different types of peer review that exists. I've talked about single blind and double blind. There is open peer review where everyone gets to know the peer reviewers, and there's even post-publication peer review where you could review an article even after it was published. In terms of post-publication, and I will end with this, you need to present your work. You've done the hard work. Now it's the time to sort of communicate it with others. This is one of the most useful things that happens to everyone engaged with research. Presentations, seminars, poster presentations, discussions, curriculums, seminars, and so on. So I'm repeating myself here. This is very important because you're going to have people objecting to your work, and you're going to be explaining your work over and over again, especially in fairs and exhibits. So that's very important for you. It improves you, it improves your experience, and gets you to share your work as much as possible. You could also upload it online to places like ResearchGate, or in a conference proceeding, or in a book, or even in a magazine, and so on. You can also try to find collaborators by going on to Google Scholar and checking their research, and perhaps going into their one of their research articles, finding their email, and then sending them an email and discussing with them, telling them, I'm interested in doing research with you. Are you up? Would you like to sort of have an assistant or someone that works with you on this process, or whatnot? I wish I had more time, but this is sort of the limits that we have here. I'm going to try to allow participants to unmute. Dr. Hussein, can you hear me? You can, I think, unmute. Can you unmute?
We didn't. Yeah, now I can. Thank you, Dr. Ali. It's really interesting and intensive. I think you have maybe 5, 6 minutes to receive questions. Please, for the attendees, thank you for attending the seminar, and feel free to ask a question. Dr. Ali.
All right, so I thought there was a comments. There are, if there are no, maybe if you don't want to say it, you can write it in the comment section or in the chat, and I can answer it.
I may add, while we are waiting for people to ask questions, I may add, it's good to have feedback from other people to our work, either if it is presentation, if it is paper, if it is something we wrote, because feedback will give you another, let me say, side view of your work. So you can build on this feedback and try to improve your work. So it's good to share your information with your colleagues. At the level of undergraduate, you have some assignments, projects, and I always advise my students to make a group and share their information and receive question from their colleagues. Sometimes you may don't have answer for the questions, but it's good to see, or let me say, to have some highlighted questions from others, so you can improve your knowledge in the field. Any question, please feel free to ask.
I'll take this as a sign that this has been hopefully effective.
Hello? Hello,
there.
can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can.
Yes, Prof Anis. Yes, good to hear from you.
Hello, how are you, Dr. Ali and Dr.
Hi, Doctor.
Hussein?
Hello,
We're
Prof
doing
Anis.
well. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming in.
I'm very happy to see you again on this webinar.
Yeah, thank you
We
very
too,
much
we
for
too, yeah.
for coming by. Thank you very much, Dr. Anis.
In the beginning, I want to thank you about this useful information. I have one question, please. It's regarding how can we recognize a fake journal, because now this is also a very important subject. Some new students and researchers send their papers to the not well-known journal. So my question, how can we recognize these fake journal?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question, actually. I totally agree with you. Many students fall into that trap. In fact, not even students, even I have fallen into that trap before. Well, not personally, but I've fallen into that trap because sometimes even conferences would have deals to publish their the submitted manuscripts to these conferences with journals that are predatory. I would say that with regards to predatory journals, there is two very important things. Number one is with regards to undergraduates, I think that the undergraduates should not deal with any journals without going back to their supervisor and advisor. I think that the advisor should be their eye into that world without stealing away their, let's say, the experience of going through publishing and sending something to the editor. But they should not be dealing with the publishing process alone for many reasons. One of these reasons is that they have a lack of experience, so they don't have the experience that you have when it comes to publication. The second point, which is with regards to everyone else in general, we need more awareness in terms of dealing with predatory journals, because it's not just about the name of the journal. Sometimes these journals would play certain games, and I've seen this over and over again, where they would create the same name, and sometimes even they would create the same website. So the website would look oddly the same as that of a prestigious journal. And this requires for someone to actually look at the URL of the website. So sometimes we can have some checks and balances where we view the URL of the website itself. So you go to the website and you see the URL and you verify that this is the URL that you are looking for. Now, this has also been facilitated by going through the page of the publisher itself. So if you go to Elsevier and then from Elsevier, you look for Elsevier journals, you are less likely to fall victim to journals like these. Also, predatory journals. Also, if you go to platforms such as Scientific Journal Ranking, which shows you only Scopus-related journals. So by not going directly through Google to these journals, that's very useful to completely ignore emails from journals. Journals rarely send emails asking for a particular author to publish. If they do that within the realms of a special topic. So it's a special topic, or it could be something like a special issue, and then they choose a researcher to lead that special issue, a well-known researcher in the field, who will then use the platform to send emails to other researchers. So I would tell the students, I totally agree with you. This is a very major issue that many students fall victim to, especially in the Middle East, because we don't have enough awareness of how to deal with these problems. In fact, we don't even have awareness about how to deal with other aspects, such as similarity and all sorts of things related to the ethical aspects of research. I would say that the first thing is we educate them about being extremely careful when it comes to the publication process, to not supersede their advisors or supervisors, to take the time with it, and to focus on going through publications or through journals that are within the umbrella of a larger institutes that are already accredited or that are already well established.
Excuse me, Dr. Ali, what about bill list? Because in my country, in Iraq, we now also check the journal and the bill list for the predatory journal.
Yeah.
It is it is enough to know the fake journal depending on this list.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's quite useful, but in many cases, sometimes it's not updated. So with the bill list, what Bill does is that they view a journal and they have a specific criteria. And according to this criteria, they would say that a journal is predatory or not predatory. But sometimes these criteria are as far as them not knowing enough about the journal itself. So perhaps they don't see that the journal is within a major brand, for example, a major company. Perhaps they don't have the sufficient information. So this only puts liability or more work on the journal to contact Bill in order to explain themselves to Bill. But generally speaking, if a journal is already on the Bill list, that means that it's not a highly prestigious journal. It doesn't mean it's a bad journal, but it means it's not highly prestigious or not prestigious journal, meaning that it's probably not Scopus indexed, it's probably not Web of Science indexed, and it probably has not run for many years. So I agree with you.
Dr. Ali, sometimes you can see that the journal is in the bill list while the publisher was not.
The publishers, yeah. Do you have a specific example for a publisher that is not a specific one?
Yes, but for now I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes when we check a journal, we found that the journal is a predatory journal, while the publisher not.
The publisher is not.
May I add here, Dr. Ali?
Please.
May I add something? Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, we have two things: the predatory journals and bill list, and how we know the right journal to submit for. Let me start from the bill list. Bill list, actually, they update it from the time to time. I mean, I don't advise that we depend 100% on it, because it depends on the criteria they put. One of the criteria, as example, the information provided in the website of the journal itself. So sometimes there is not enough information of the source of the recognition of the journal, and sometimes we see some journals in and out every couple of years or every year. Sometimes I don't want to give examples. I know some examples from the list. But for the first question you started with, how I know the right journal to submit and avoid the plagiarized journal, as Dr. Ali mentioned, for undergraduate, I always also advise my students to follow their professors or supervisors, because they know how to guide them correctly. But for the professors and doctors, what I advise, and based on experience, avoid to go to the journal directly, either by coming from your colleague through email, or you find it in the Google. Either you go to the publisher itself, and there are many recognized publishers such as Elsevier, Nature, Springer, MDPI, Wiley, and other publisher, IOP.
Dr. Hussein, Dr. Hussein, I want to add something. We now also advise our students to avoid a Q3 and a Q4 journal, because from time to time they go out from Scopus.
Correct, totally.
So now for now in Iraq, we advise our student to depend on a Q1 and a Q3 journal, because it is more stable.
Yeah, that's correct. I totally agree. But regarding also back to finish the point here is either you access to the publisher himself, I mean, to their website and go to the journal, or you search for the journal in the Scopus database or Web of Science database and access to the journal from there, from the website or from the Scopus. Don't copy the name and put it from them and put it in the Google, because some website, what they do, they try to, as Dr. Ali mentioned, they try to copy paste the journal and the how it look like, the style, and even they may change one letter or number, and then they have the same, let me say, journal, and they try to fraud at the end. So avoid to go directly to the Google and find the journal.
Yeah, I think.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Hussein and Dr. Ali.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anis. Yeah, I would like to just add one point. Is it would be good in every institute to have a committee, to establish a committee that will look into the journals and try to come up with recommendations for the students, just to illustrate.
We have such a committee in the University of Diyala in Iraq.
Wow, yeah.
This committee give the advice to the students and to the fresh PhD student, and they give some useful tips for choosing the right journal.
That's great. Yeah, we need that. We don't have that here, but we need to establish that. I like the idea, but perhaps we can discuss about that in the future to establish it here as well.
This is useful. Yeah, this is helpful and useful. Yeah.
Yes.
Any more question, please, attendees, our students, IEEE group. If you have any question to Dr. Ali. Okay, thank you. I think we stop here. Thank you, Dr. Ali.
Thank you all.
And thank you for the attendees for attending this session. Dr. Ali, the last word for you, and we end the session.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank all of you. I would like to thank IEEE for having me, and I would like to thank all of the attendees. I hope that this is useful for you in doing your theses, in doing your papers, and participating in more research and empowering research in our area and in the Middle East specifically. And I hope that if you have any other questions, you can email me at my AUIS University email. Thank you, Dr. Hussein, for having me, and thank you to IEEE Oman Sohar University section.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good time. Have a good day. See you in another session. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.